Okay, so we are very delighted and excited to have with us today Richard Martin. He was a former newspaper reporter in Massachusetts, Rhode Island, and Iowa. And he also served as the deputy press secretary for Joe Biden's Iowa caucuses campaign in 1987. Currently, he owns his own business, Martin Technical Research. This is a firm specializing in business to business, scientific, industrial, and technical markets. And in that capacity, he's traveled extensively through the Midwest for the past 30 years, which helped lay the groundwork for the report that you are about to hear about. And this Factory Towns report that he'll be presenting on, I think it really goes a long way toward explaining how and why the blue wall crumbled in the Midwest. So it's really important analysis, and we're thrilled to have Richard with us. Richard, thank you so much for being here. And I invite you now to start your screen share and show us what you got.
Okay. Are we there yet?
We hear you
At the
and
screen.
don't see the screen share just yet.
Okay. Let's try that again. How about now?
Not seeing the screen share.
Okay. Well, we were there before, so we can get there again.
We can do it again.
Let's see. All right, share screen. And that's what I want. Do we have part of it?
Success.
And I want just the big screen. Okay, here we go, the big screen. Okay, so as Erica said, I used to be a newspaper reporter, and a big part of that job is figuring out where the main story is as you sift through a given set of facts, right? The who, what, when, where, why, and how of a situation. And I've tried to bring that same discipline to the work that I do for my clients. And I've tried to bring that same discipline to this study. And more than anything else, what I'm trying to do with this study and the dissemination of its findings is get people, Democrats, to focus on what the Roman philosopher Marcus Aurelius once called first principles. And by that, I mean to understand where Democrats have a problem, because it is most definitely not in the rural areas. And by the way, I applaud the Urban Rural Bridge Initiative for the work that you folks are doing. But what I'm saying in this study is that, as unlike what conventional political opinion would have us think, Democrats' problem is not primarily in the rural areas. It is in these counties that I call factory town counties, where we've seen a devastating decline in our manufacturing base over the last 20 years. Now, I know that political people, they want to get to, why did this happen? How do we get out of it? What do we do to get out of it? I understand all that. But I think it's important first to just figure out where the problem is and understand who these voters are, and not just do a drive-by, but really understand what's in their bones before we can begin to address the problems. So the 10 states that this study includes are these. The original version looked at the 5 swing states of Iowa, Ohio, Minnesota, Michigan, Wisconsin, and Pennsylvania. These nine states plus upstate part of New York are not only electorally important, but they also share similar economic bases. I'm not saying that this analysis that I'm using can be applied to other parts of the country. Maybe one other state where this could be used, maybe the state of Maine, but I don't think it would be applicable for any other states, either for economic or cultural reasons. Looking forward, at this part of the country has some key Senate races coming up in the fall. There's Wisconsin, Ohio and Pennsylvania are currently held by Republicans. There's opportunities there for pickups by Democrats. We may get lucky in Missouri if the Republicans there self-implode like they once did against Claire McCaskill. So I want to spend a little bit of time on the methodology that was used for this study. I'm sure you're all familiar with sort of the prevailing conventional methodology is to use social demography, right? The non-college educated voter, which we've heard about ad nauseum for the last 8 years. And I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with that. I'm not saying it should be discarded. What I am saying is we should triangulate that analysis by looking at the electorate through a different prism. So traditional means of assessing the electorate sort of classifies voters into 3 categories, right? Urban, suburban, and rural. And what I'm saying is that's too simplistic and completely overlooks a huge portion of the electorate and the economy, namely small towns and medium-sized cities that are experiencing a shrinking manufacturing base. Dubuque, Iowa is not rural. So these manufacturing counties, sort of the shorthand description that's evolved for them is we've come to call them factory towns, factory town counties. So the sort of classifications, the metro counties, these are the big cities, right? Philadelphia, Pittsburgh, Milwaukee, Chicago, Detroit, Grand Rapids. I include Des Moines in that category. These are the traditional Democratic base. Another part of the Democratic base are the college counties. Essentially, these have been blue islands in a sea of red. And for me, what determines whether or not a county is a college county is the college or university there? Is it the prime, economic motive force within the county? Suburban counties, kind of already know intuitively what those are. Heavy service, economic activity. The other thing I would add about the suburbs is I think we all intuitively understand that the economic health of the large metro counties, the big cities, and the surrounding suburbs, in various ways, they're interdependent on each other. So if the big city is falling upon hard times, that has a negative ripple effect on the suburban counties. So we intuitively understand that. I'm going to jump down and look at the rural counties here for a minute. 90% of these, agriculture is the primary economic activity, but there are some counties, particularly up in Wisconsin, Minnesota, Michigan, up north, where forestry is important. There are counties in Missouri and Pennsylvania where mining is important. And then there are some counties where tourism is important. So the two I really want to focus on here, and really what this study is all about, are the small manufacturing counties and the mid-sized manufacturing counties. Now, the average number of jobs in the United States related to manufacturing is 9%. And what I did, you might ask, why not just say that any county that has 9% jobs from manufacturing, why not just call that a manufacturing county? What I wanted to do was I wanted to identify counties that are especially manufacturing intensive and really underline that. So I wanted to set a high threshold. So I chose 13% more or less as my threshold for determining whether or not a county is a manufacturing county. So if 13% of the jobs in that county are manufacturing related, I call it a manufacturing county. If you think about it for a minute, 13 is 44% higher than 9. So if you have $900 in your wallet and I have $1,300 in my wallet, I've got 44% more money than you. So I set this higher threshold. On top of that, though, I want to point out in many of these counties, manufacturing jobs account for 20% or more of the jobs in the county. So I'm just going to look at 4 key states here for a minute. In Michigan, 33 of the 54 manufacturing counties are plus 20% in manufacturing jobs. In Ohio, 50 of the 68 manufacturing counties are plus 20% in manufacturing jobs. In Pennsylvania, 20 of the 39 manufacturing counties are plus 20%. And in Wisconsin, 43 of the 56 manufacturing counties are plus 20%. So those are very high percentages of very, very heavily manufacturing intensive activity. And that describes where they are today. Another key part of this study is looking at what's happened to these counties over the last 20 years. One other thing I want to point out is the reason why I chose the difference between small and manufacturing, small and mid-sized manufacturing counties. I looked at it from the perspective of a voter, somebody who lives in one of these counties. If you live in a county with a city that has 35,000 people, there's a very good chance that that city is going to have job finding resources that you can access to find another job that's comparable to the one that you just lost because the factory you worked in just closed. Whereas if you work in a small manufacturing county with very small towns in it, chances are they're going to have fewer resources that you can access in order to land on your feet after losing your job. So I looked at it from the perspective of, what's the experience potentially of a worker or a voter that lives in one of these areas. So why do these working class counties matter? They matter because they take up an appreciable size of the electorate. We cannot just write off these areas and think there's enough blue votes in the big cities, the college town, and the suburbs for Democrats to win. There's simply far too many voters in these manufacturing counties to overlook them. And if we're honest with ourselves, frankly, that's what Democrats have been doing. I also want to point out, look here at the bottom. We see it's a very low number for Illinois. It's a very low number for upstate New York. And obviously, if you want to compete in these other 8 states, you have to do at least a halfway decent job in these counties in order to be competitive. So as we look at this pie chart, going back to what I just said about Illinois and upstate New York, the original version, if you add up these 2 slices of the pie, we get 45.9%. The original version of this work, which just looked at the 5 swing states, that number was 49.2%. And the metro number, instead of being 25.9, was actually 21.2. And the suburban number, instead of being 17.3, it was 15.7. That's because Illinois is so big and Chicago and Cook County are so massive, it has this skewing effect on the pie chart. So the reality is the numbers in 9 of the states are actually more severe than this, worse than this for Democratic candidates. This part of the pie and this part of the pie is basically 50%. And when you add them up, this part of the pie is smaller, this part of the pie is smaller. So again, Illinois is safely in the Democratic column. If you kind of remove Illinois from the pie chart, the numbers are even worse for Democrats. So we looked at the presidential vote over the last 3 cycles. I want to point out that as I did my analysis, I only looked at the net margins between the Democrat and the Republican in each race. I completely filtered out any data regarding third-party candidates, just stripped that away because I wanted to get down to the meat that was on the bone. And we looked at election results on a county-by-county basis. That's somewhat easy to do, and it's also possible to compare that data to other data related to manufacturing job losses in particular, so that we could cross-check it. Also, we could cross-check it against racial composition data as well. So really, what we've got here, we've got 2 problems. Um, Problem number one, as we just saw from the pie chart, the math is tough. The math is not in our favor. That's problem number one. And by the way, I'm not picking on Chuck Schumer. I really like Chuck Schumer a lot. He was flat out wrong though in saying that, we're going to trade one blue collar vote and get two suburban votes in return. That's basically what this means. We're going to trade one, we're going to get two. So number one is the math is bad. And number two, there is still a lot of Democrats, activists, people who run campaigns, in particular, people who do not live in this part of the country, who believe that the math is still in our favor, that all we have to do is energize the base and that's enough and we'll win. They're wrong. They're just flat out wrong. And there's no nice way to say that. So now, as I scroll through this here, not every single county lines up on this linear curve, but it's pretty darn close. So I'm actually going to repeat this slide later in the report because I feel it's that important. But as we look at big manufacturing job losses, that leads to a big shift from blue to red. If we look at medium manufacturing job losses, that leads to a medium shift from blue to red. And if we look at small manufacturing job losses, again, that leads to a small shift. And again, this is only in the factory town counties, the small manufacturing and mid-sized manufacturing counties. The data does not line up this way in the suburbs. It does not line up this way in the large metro counties with respect to manufacturing job losses. So looking at the margins by county types, we see that although we picked up 1.2 million votes, or I should say Biden did 1.2 million votes better than Obama in 2012 in these three county categories, we see, pretty severe losses, and in particular within these manufacturing counties. So getting back to Mr. Schumer's observation that for every vote that we lose, we're going to pick up two. Looking at just these two county categories, we see 2.5 million votes, okay? We're going to say that the metro big cities and the rurals over here, we're going to say that we swapped the pond for a pond, okay? So 2.5 million here versus 500,000 here. We didn't trade one and get two. We traded 5 and got 1. And it's actually worse than that. So it's kind of like, all right, so I'm going to use a sports analogy here. We traded a guy that hit 25 home runs for a guy that hit 5 home runs. And it's even worse than that because the guy that hit 5 home runs is, he's going to retire. He's done. The point is that the votes that Biden picked up in the suburbs, those were rental votes. They voted for Biden because they could not stand Trump's toxicity culturally. And they did not vote for Democrats down ballot. So not only is 5 for 1 a bad trade, we can't even count on that one in future elections. All right, so anything else, Sarah? I want to know. Okay. So looking at the performance by county type, we see that, okay, in these, Obama carried these 10 states by nearly 2 million votes. Biden lost them by about 38,000. We see that the Democratic vote shrank in 767 counties out of 853. That's 90% of the counties in these 10 states where the Democratic vote share shrank. We also see that, okay, great. We ran up big margins in the metro and college counties. We energized our base. We did that. And that's terrific. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. But we also see where Obama narrowly lost the suburbs by 54,000 votes. Biden won them quite handily. But again, many of those suburban voters did not vote for down ticket Democrats. And then the overall big picture is the bottom fell out in the manufacturing rural counties, especially the problematic mid-sized manufacturing counties. So we see where's my arrow? Okay, so right here, these mid-sized manufacturing counties, that was the base of Obama's win in Iowa in 2012 and was a key part of Obama's win in Ohio in 2012 as well. And the bottom completely fell out there, completely fell out in the much smaller manufacturing counties. So here's a sample of some of these working class counties that I'm talking about. Trumbull County, Ohio, that's the home of the General Motors Lordstown Assembly Plant, which lost jobs for years and years before finally shutting down in 2019. If you look at Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, so last October, October 6th, the New York Times did a story about the release of this report, and it's been picked up in the Washington Post, Robert Kuttner's American Prospect, the National Catholic Reporter. There's many places where I've seen articles written about this report. And recently, NBC News did a 5-minute story on Luzerne County, Pennsylvania, talking about how it was going to be a key bellwether county for the midterms coming up and the Senate race there in Pennsylvania. So I'm starting to see signs that people are understanding that these types of counties are really the hinge point for upcoming important electoral contests. But anyways, I just wanted to kind of share, give sort of a representative sample of some of the types of places that we're talking about. And again, these are not rural areas. Just back up for a minute. So I just turned 60. Growing up as a kid in the 1970s, a very popular TV series was MASH. One of the characters on that show, Radar O'Reilly, grew up in Ottumwa, Iowa, and on the show, Ottumwa is portrayed as, you know, kind of this rural area. He grew up on a farm, blah, blah, blah. Look, my kids in high school competed in the same conference as Ottumwa in swimming and soccer and debate, and I've spent many a day in Ottumwa. I also used to go to Ottumwa occasionally when I was a newspaper reporter down in Burlington, Iowa. Ottumwa is not freaking rural. Ottumwa is a blue collar town. It's got great bars. It's got great pool halls. I really like that place a lot. It's not rural. And so again, I'm driving home the point here that this mischaracterization that Democrats have a rural problem. I would maintain they've always had a rural problem, but what's different now is the problem has spilled over primarily for economic reasons into these manufacturing counties. So looking at it again in terms of the partisan vote shift by county type, we see, where I lose my arrow again. We see the big vote loss in Ohio. We see the nature of the problem in Iowa. We see the big losses in Michigan. However, in Michigan, we started out at least with an appreciable base in Michigan, so we're able to hold on there. Anyways, I think this demonstrates that, you know, again, the nature of the problem electorally with respect to these manufacturing counties. So this is probably something many of you are already familiar with, how Biden won in the key swing states of Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. So in the suburbs, we see that in Pennsylvania, Biden's margin was 81,000 votes. Well, he did about 110,000 votes better than Hillary did in 2016. So clearly, this improvement carries him to victory in Pennsylvania. He did about 55,000 votes better in the suburbs in Michigan. That's about 1/3 of his margin of victory in Michigan. And the margin of victory was so narrow in Wisconsin, but the fact that he did 8,000 votes better in the suburbs in Wisconsin helped quite a bit. I think most people know this already. This has been well reported on nationally. What we have not heard about is how Biden won on his flanks in these key swing states and the small manufacturing counties. So nationally, I'm going to find my right slide here. So nationally, voter turnout was the highest it has been since the year 1900 in 2020. So 120 years since the last time voter turnout was as high as it was. And overall, throughout the country, voter turnout increased 7%. But in these small manufacturing counties in these 3 states, look at the increase in voter turnout. Trump up appreciably, but in every single one of these states, Biden did a little bit better. And it's a damn good thing he did. Because if his turnout had only been up 7% or 8% or 10% like it was nationally, he loses much worse in these counties, and there's a chance he loses these states. Now, I put this slide up because, you know, as you go through this data, if you're a true blue Democrat, there's a lot to find that's discouraging. This, to me, this is very encouraging. And I would like to be able to talk to people in Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin who worked in these small manufacturing counties, who live and work in these small factory towns in these areas. I'd like to find out what they did to get voter turnout up that much. I'd like to, you know, I'm not saying I have all the answers here, folks. I've got a lot of questions too. So I would like to find out, what did they do? These are big freaking numbers, right? I've worked on political campaigns since I was 8 years old. These are big improvements. I'd like to know, what did they do? Did they do anything different? Were there any tactics at play? Messaging wise, what did they do? I'd really like to know, because this is encouraging that Biden was able to improve his numbers that much in these 3 key states. So what I've done with this methodology is I've said, okay, if at least 13% of the jobs in your county are derived from manufacturing activity, then I wave my magic wand and you're classified as a manufacturing county. But that just describes where the county is today. It doesn't really tell you what's happened within that county over the last 20 years. So to determine what's happened in the county, we decided to look at how many manufacturing jobs were lost in the county, not just in these manufacturing counties, but in all counties, the big cities, the suburbs, the rural areas, and even the college counties. So what we see,
Richard, I'm so sorry to cut in. I'm just I'm looking at the time. It sounds like you might be segueing into like a more granular part of your analysis.
okay,
And I wonder if you'd be willing just to pause here, and people might have questions that will lead you into some of those more detailed slides, or possibly might have more general questions. I want to allow time to see where people's interest lies. Is that okay? Or do you have anything you want to say just by way of wrapping up before we move to Q&A?
I don't think I've got anything that is super, super important. Much of it is on the margins. Yeah, I've already covered the most important things here. So if we want to open it up to discussion or questions, let's go for it.
Fantastic. Yeah, thank you so much. That was a lot of important takeaways, definitely jumped out to me. So I think you did get some of the main points across that are pretty jarring for sure. So let's see what questions and comments people have.
Erica, let me
yes.
suggest that Richard keep his keep sharing screen so that he
Oh, okay.
may want to use some of these slides in responding to some of the questions.
Yeah,
Okay,
good
so
idea.
how about if I just put up a new screen like every 20 seconds or 30 seconds or so?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, that's great. Okay, so feel free to post a question in chat or put up your little blue hand. Not seeing anyone just yet, so I think I might ask a question then while other people are considering theirs, which is that it occurs to me that, you know, like NAFTA was passed what in 96, and I'm assuming like a lot of factories started closing and a lot of jobs were lost as early as the 2000s. So do you have any sense of like, why did it take a while, you know, for this like complete collapse of blue collar democratic vote that you just laid out?
That's a good question. And I think the answer is Trump was the first major party nominee since forever to come out aggressively against free trade agreements. One of the things that I have pointed out in some of the interviews that I've done is in his first debate with Hillary, and as we know, the first debate is always the most important one. He mentioned build the wall on the Mexican border. He mentioned that 0 times. However, in 10 different parts of that debate, he talked about bad free trade agreements, unfair trade agreements, or bad trade deals with China. 10 times. The first question he took was from Lester Holt on a completely different topic, and he just brushed it aside and came out guns blazing against free trade deals. The people who live in these counties have been directly affected by these free trade deals. I would recommend a book, American Made, written by Farrah Stockman, member of the New York Times editorial board, where she hunkered down for more than a year with 3 Midwestern factory town workers that had been affected by plant closings, and basically talks about how their views flipped with respect to politically. So when you have a candidate that finally comes along and speaks to these grievances that people have been voicing for decades, that's going to resonate.
Yeah, that makes sense. I noticed that too, and I've read some articles that have detailed all of those references he made to NAFTA constantly.
And let's not forget, Hillary was married to Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was the main engine behind NAFTA, and he also lobbied very aggressively for China's acceptance into the World Trade Organization upon leaving the White House. I'm not saying that every single voter that flipped from blue to red knew that, but many of them did. So in many ways, Hillary was boxed in with respect to that particular issue, vis-a-vis Trump. Unless she was going to disown her husband's positions, there wasn't really much she could do. So,
Richard, I wonder,
Folks,
this is Anthony. Thank you for this. This is great. The distinction between rural and the small and mid-sized manufacturing towns, I think, is really helpful for us because we are kind of laser focused on rural. But in my experience, now this is primarily in Central Appalachia, Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, but other places as well. There's also a lot of towns that I am guessing would fall into your rural part of the spectrum that are probably below that 13% level.
right.
Where a lot of small plants, textiles, furniture in particular, in some places sawmills and timber related jobs don't add up to a huge amount of the jobs probably underneath that threshold, but they've also closed. in those rural counties, adding to the sense that the farmers and the other folks in the county that have been kind of losing ground for a while have, of just our county is completely overlooked and misunderstood by the Democrats. So they may not make it into your threshold as a manufacturing or as a factory town county, but they've still lost small factories employing 50 or 100 people, and that I think has solidified their hostility towards Democrats. So I guess I'm saying that some of that analysis, even I think, percolates over into the rural counties that don't meet the threshold.
Oh, absolutely. And I'm not sure if I made this point, but oftentimes a farm family, when times get a little bit hard, the husband or the wife or a member of the family will take on an extra shift at a factory. So let's say they live in what I call a rural county. They'll take on a shift for 3 or 4 months at a factory 30 miles down the road in a neighboring small manufacturing county or a neighboring mid-sized manufacturing county in order to get through hard times. So the economic destiny of the rural areas is very much intertwined with the manufacturing counties, similar to how the suburbs are, interconnected to the metros. So another just example of this point, in the summer of 2020 here in Iowa, we had a derecho. I'd never heard this word before. Basically, it's an inland hurricane. We had winds of up to 100 to 120 miles an hour. And depending on where the corn crop was with respect to protection from the wind, there were areas where the corn crop was completely leveled. So I have a client that is based in one of these small manufacturing counties. Here in Iowa, we register our vehicles not with the state, but with the counties. So each license plate on a car indicates the county that the car is based in. So about 4 weeks after this derecho leveled the corn crop, I started to notice this client I work for in their offices 3 days a week. I started to notice, A, more and more cars in the parking lot, and B, more and more license plates from neighboring rural counties in the parking lot. So I asked somebody, hey, what's going on? And what I heard was that people were asking, now this is a union shop. The union had to vote on this, whether or not to accept more workers in to work extra shifts, and helped, by the way, that they were behind production-wise and getting their products out the door. But they took on a bunch of people that needed the money, that needed the work to work in that factory. So these are people that don't live in the small manufacturing county, they live in a rural county, but yet, they're able to take advantage of the presence of the work there in the production plant. So again, this demonstrates the interdependence between these smaller manufacturing counties and their rural cousins.
Thank you.
Great. Well, I think we're going to have to wrap it up now. Richard, thank you so much for that presentation. And I really urge anyone who found that interesting to go download the full report. Richard, maybe you could drop that in the chat. We sent it out with the announcement too for today, but there's just tons of information in there and all of the data and methodology. It's really great.
Well, I was happy to see that the full report, there's a link to it on your website, the Urban Rural Bridge Initiative. So I forget which tab it was, but you can download it right from there. So it's 82 pages long. And if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me a personal email. So.
Wonderful. Thank you so much.